Hi, welcome
Hi.
to um, this. I've got Jake Williamson here. Jake is going to be starting at the University of Utah's Medical School in fall 2020, barring any pandemic issues.
Right.
Yeah. So, Jake, tell me kind of about your application process. Tell me
Yeah,
what happened
so
for you.
it was all going according to plan at first, right? I took my MCAT after my junior year. I was ready to apply and just start right after my senior year. And so the first time around, I did really well in the MCAT. I had good grades. I kind of checked all the boxes. And so I felt pretty confident going to my first application, probably a little bit too confident. And then it turns
What do you
out,
mean? What do you mean too confident? Like you. I guess does that mean you're like I just looked at the numbers? I'm like I got this.
pretty
But
much, yeah, I knew I was above average. I didn't, and so I kind of cut some corners. Definitely
like
cut some
what?
corners in my first application.
Like
Yeah.
that's
So
always what I ask. I mean, right? Because
yeah.
I know anybody watching this right now wants to know, well, what corners? And because I'm positive that when you were applying, you didn't think that you were really cutting
Of
corners.
course not. Of
You
course not.
know, like
Yeah.
hindsight's always 2020 with that.
Mhm.
So
Well, so a couple that come to mind. So first of all, I cut corners on my writing. I talked to you and I talked to like the pre-med office, but I didn't really put my heart into it. I figured that, just as the same way I got into BYU, the same things I've always written on my grades, my test scores, I figured those would speak louder than my writing. Um, and so I did the writing, but I didn't really put the necessary time into it. And then also just like instead of paying for the MSAR, which is what we use to
mm.
look at the medical school information, I just kind of picked schools that I knew I was above the average MCAT. I didn't really look into them too much. And then it turns out like half the schools I applied to were public and I really didn't have a chance of getting into um,
Because you weren't a resident of that
because I wasn't a
state,
resident.
and mhm.
Right. Because as an out of state student, I really didn't have a chance. And so, and then I tried to save money. So like some schools, I didn't apply to because I knew the tuition was a lot, or because I didn't want to pay the secondary application fee. And just cutting corners because I was confident that I'd get into the schools anyways. And so I didn't apply to as many schools. I tried to save money that way.
So how
Um,
many did you apply to that first round?
so the first time I applied to, I can't remember if it was 8 or 9 MD schools and 5 DO schools.
Okay. And that means like you also completed secondaries for them and
And
everything.
yes, and I did the
Mm-hmm.
secondaries for those as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Because
yeah,
sometimes people will say, I applied to 40 schools. And I'm
right.
like, so how many secondaries? And they're like, 10. And I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, so we applied to 10, right? Like,
yeah. So I did the secondaries for all of them.
mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and so then that first year, I actually got. So this is a weird part of my story. So I actually got accepted to Rocky Vista in St. George.
Mm-hmm.
But because I didn't do my research, I didn't know that DO schools want you to make a down payment on tuition early. So usually like December, January, you're putting a couple $1,000s down. And again, because I was cutting corners, it's not that I didn't want to do DO. It's just that I still had not heard back from any MD schools. And I was like, you know what? It's my first year. I really would rather go to like University of Utah as my number one school. And there were a couple other schools I really was holding out hope for. And so I'm like, I'm not going to pay the down payment. Stupid decision, right? 2020 vision. I could be done with my first year of med school. It was a dumb decision, but it's the decision I made, cutting corners again, right? So yeah, so I actually, and then I got into that school. And so then after I turned that down, in the end, in March, I found out I got my last rejection letter. Didn't make it into any of the MD schools. I got an interview at the University of Utah, and that was it. I didn't actually get any other interviews even. So I was feeling pretty down on myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like one interview out of 10, I turned down the one school that accepted me. And I forgot to say, after Rocky Vista accepted me, I figured that was my top DO school, so I turned down the others, even though I was invited for a couple of
Mm-hmm.
interviews there. But Rocky Vista was my number one choice as far as DO schools went. So yeah, so after that, I was feeling pretty down on myself. And then do you want me to keep going with like what I did to improve my secondary
Yeah,
application?
well, so okay, so it didn't go as planned,
Not
right?
at all. Yeah, not at
Didn't
all.
go as planned.
Mhm.
You didn't put the down payment at Rocky Vista. Um, probably didn't research your schools that you should have to kind of understand, like, I think sometimes people don't recognize that when they're public schools, they're like, and 80% of our slots are for our in-state, 10% are for like the adjoining state that doesn't have a med school, and then we've got
Right.
this 10 other slots, and you're like,
Exactly.
Okay, that's
Mhm.
not looking so hot. Okay. Um, what do you feel like you mentioned grades and your MCAT score. What else do you feel like was like strong that first go round in your application? Like, and the grades, all that stuff matters, but at the end of the day, it's not the stuff that gets you accepted.
Right. Right.
So what do you feel like was kind of a strength of your application?
Yeah, I think I felt like I did a really good job of getting a wide variety of activities. I had a lot of different leadership experiences. I had some different service experiences that I thought were kind of unique. And I just felt like I didn't fall into because I know some pre-meds, like they fall into the trap of all of their volunteer experience, all their experiences are medical related. And I
Hmm.
had some, but I also felt like I had a lot of things outside of medicine that kind of helped separate me.
Mm.
Um, However, when I filled out my application, I didn't do a great job of showing that, as far as like labeling them under the right categories and saying what I learned from them. I kind of just like talked about them. But I did feel like that was another strong point of my application, that the second time around, I kind of showed that off a little bit more.
Mm. Okay, so let's get to that second time
Sure.
around. So, I one of the tricks when you're a second time around applicant is that you have that whole year where you're just kind of hoping to get accepted. And I've worked with some people who like they're hoping to be accepted and they aren't doing anything during that time. And so,
Right.
just as you mentioned, the timeline of like by March when I got my last rejection and I realized that I wasn't going to be going, you've got a quick turnaround time to
Mhm.
hit the next application cycle if that's what you want to do.
Right.
So, um, how did you use that quick turnaround time to kind of go for it?
Yeah. Well, and I will add, every
Hmm.
single secondary application that I filled out, maybe not every single one, but the vast majority asked me what I had been doing during my gap year,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
They're not just going to kind of overlook it. Like they absolutely want to know what you've been doing. So luckily I continued doing my volunteer activities even after I submitted my application. So I think that's first part, is
Hmm.
don't just quit when your application's in. And then I actually moved because I graduated. So I moved in December. So it took me kind of a month to kind of like get back. And then once I realized I wasn't going to get in, I started volunteering right away. Like I didn't waste any time. And I feel like I picked really good experiences because number one, so I volunteered in a free clinic. And then the other one is I volunteered with hospice. I feel like those were two really good activities. And then I started shadowing more doctors, right?
Hmm.
And as well as working. So I think between all those things, med schools were impressed with what I had been doing, and I got more letters of recommendation. Right.
Hmm.
So that's another important thing, is that I didn't want to just submit the same 5 letters of recommendation that were all a year old. So I got a new volunteer activity with a new supervisor, and I really worked hard to like show up early and put all my time in. And I'm still doing that even now, like just because I feel like that's a good practice, is to stick with the things you say you're going to do. Um, and so that helped a lot too, is getting new experiences with new letters of recommendation. But if you haven't started, I mean, you got to start as quick as you can, because like you said, you find out in March that you're not getting in, and then June 1st you're submitting your next application.
Hmm. So one thing I would say, like just kind of that consistency. I love that you pointed out. You're like, I submitted my application, but I kept doing some
Right.
of that stuff, right? Like it can be easy, certainly, to be like, okay, now I got to
Right.
breathe, right?
Totally.
And
Hmm.
certainly, you got to breathe, but you also got to kind of recognize that. So,
Totally.
okay, so turns out you're reapplying. What did you do differently this time? Hopefully, you got access to the MSAR.
I did
Like,
get access to the MSAR, and I spent a lot of hours researching schools.
hmm.
I have like a whole chart that I drew out, like how many out of state get in, all these things. I had a whole
Hmm.
method. So that was first part. And I just decided, I was like, I already missed a year. And in the end, it worked out okay. First of all, if you
Hmm.
miss a year, it's a year, and it's going to be a 30-year career. And it's been an awesome year for me. But I decided, I was like, you know what, I'm going to go all in this year. So I actually ended up applying to like 30 schools, which
So
is a
you didn't
lot.
cheap out.
No, I didn't cheap out this time. And it
Yeah.
cost a lot of money.
Hmm.
But talking to friends, I realized that I had a friend with similar MCAT scores to me, similar grades, similar demographic, everything. And he actually had a few points higher on the MCAT than me. And he only got into one school, right? And I just realized that if you look at these med schools, they're receiving thousands and thousands of applications. So really, I mean, even if your application is great, there's a chance that you just didn't get in, right? because I mean, something as obscure as maybe the person reading your application, you reminded them of your ex-boyfriend or something. I don't know. Hopefully that's not true, but
Yeah.
anyways, so I just decided I was, I'm going to spread my net wide, and if there's one school that's going to look at me, I need to make sure I apply to that one school. So I applied to a lot of schools, then I had a chance at all of them. I spent a lot of time, as you know, Christina, working on my writing.
Hmm.
And then the other thing I did is that I made sure if I did get an interview, I wasn't gonna screw it up. Because, like I said, I got an interview at University of Utah my first time around, and it went really bad. Like, I was not a great interviewee.
Mm.
So I did mock interviews with BYU. I talked to people about their interviewing skills. I did a lot of research, um, and that helped me kind of change my perspective. And so, funny thing, when I got accepted to the U, um, Dr. Chan called me, and when he told me why they accepted me, he didn't mention my MCAT grades. He said they loved your writing, the interviewers raved about you, and something else about my service experience. And those are like the three things that they told me beforehand why I didn't get in,
Mm.
right? So it definitely, that the things that I worked on, that I put more time in, absolutely helped me get in the second time around. It wasn't just luck of the draw that time.
Oh, that's so awesome. That makes me so excited for you. So,
Yeah.
um, okay. So anything you wish, like for anybody watching this that's applying right now, you'd say like, get a copy of the MSAR,
Mhm.
like take your time, kind of classify your activities and make them
Right.
shine, right?
Right.
Um, one other point, I guess, one other thing you kind of wish you would have done right from the get-go.
Um, yeah, yeah, I have one, and this
Yeah.
is a compliment to you, Christina. So, and this is actually
Oh
something
gosh.
I admit.
Oh.
Um, the first time around with my personal statement, I had a lot of people give me their opinions because everybody wants to read your personal statement. I mean, professors, like they all think they know, and a lot of them do. But it's just hard with a personal statement. There's not one right way to do it, and so I would suggest finding someone great like
Mm,
Christina to help you with it, and just work with that one person to get your personal statement. And I
mm,
spent a lot of time reflecting and like asking myself why I want to do this. I think my second personal statement was a lot more honest and a lot more, not even just well written. Like, I think the first one was well written enough, but I had one person help me. And rather than like trying to gather like please everyone that wants to read it, I just said, you know what? Sorry, I don't want your help. Worked with Christina, and I got a better personal statement the second time around.
so, well, I mean, that's nice of you to say, but certainly just what you're saying about the fact that, like, I think sometimes it is really nice to just say, like, I just got to pick one or two,
Absolutely.
and that's it. Like,
Hmm.
I love to say, like, it can be our office, it could not be our office. Like, we
Oh,
don't need to
totally.
have like the ownership of it,
Right.
but certainly, you know, that I would say like that did make, and I do use your personal statement like 1 and 2 as an example in my workshop a little
Yeah.
bit. And it's pretty fun to kind of know the backstory, to know that, like, look, he was successful, look, it worked.
Hmm. Yeah,
um
totally.
okay, so, well, Jake, I love talking to you. I'm so excited for you.
Thanks.
Congrats starting this fall. It's going to be
Yeah.
awesome, and it's going to be a
But
lot of work, and
yeah,
that's going to
well,
be just what you want.
right.
So,
Right.
at the end of the day, I know you didn't pay money to go to Rocky Vista, but I love what you said, where you're like, it's a 30-year career. Honestly, you're going to be a physician for the rest of your life. Let's have you go where you want to go.
Right.
Let's do it. So,
Hmm.
anyway, okay. Thank you. Um,
Awesome.